Kristy happens to also be my ex-wife's name, so I wonder which one of these is going to wind up being scarier. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good overview of what the horror movie syllabus is about. But in short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre. But today, we're doing our Is It Syllabus-Worthy series, where I've taken a recommendation from you guys that I've never seen before, and then I watch it and tell you guys if I think it's syllabus-worthy. Today's movie is a movie called Kristy. And this was recommended to me by a good friend and friend of the channel, Spencer, who, incidentally, if you didn't know, is also the unofficial horror movie syllabus composer. He did our closing theme song, and he's done pretty much all the other original music that you've heard here on the channel. He is amazing. Love him dearly. Thank you, Spencer, very much. And thank you for this recommendation. This movie was recommended to him in our video about the workplace horror subgenre, and he kind of compared it to the movie P2. And that's an interesting comparison that I think probably holds out, but that was the only real clue I had going into this movie. I had never heard of this movie before. I knew next to nothing about it other than that comparison to P2. So I had that much expectation going in. And I think that was a perfectly fine amount of information to have, because I think the only other information that could have been given to me would have just diminished what experience I actually wound up having. Now, what kind of experience actually was that? Well, I'm going to tell you all about it. I'm going to tell you what I liked about the movie, what I didn't like about the movie, and then ultimately I'm going to decide, is it syllabus worthy? Is it worthy of being on the horror movie syllabus? So with that, why don't I go ahead and get to my review right now? Like I said, the movie that we're talking about today is a movie called Kristy. Kristy came out in 2014 and is apparently made for the Lifetime channel, which is known as television for women, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. And it's kind of got a reputation for being a TV network that likes to show movies about women in peril and things like that, suspense movies. And they're kind of oftentimes cheesy. It's got that kind of reputation. And it's interesting that this movie gets made for that network. But we'll talk about that in a little more depth a little later on. The movie is an interesting take on kind of an obvious trope, but if you haven't seen it before, the movie is the story of a girl who stays behind during Thanksgiving break at her college because she can't afford to fly home. And so she's left alone on this deserted campus with just a couple of like security guards and staffers around. And she runs afoul of a cult of killers who decide to start stalking and terrorizing her with the ultimate intent of eventually killing her. And she is, of course, forced to fight back and fend for herself in order to survive the night, and hijinks abound, as they tend to do in movies like these. I won't go into it any farther so as to spoil it, but if I'm being really honest with you, there's not a whole lot to spoil here in terms of narrative, because it's a fairly straightforward story. It's not a whole lot of surprise. It's not something that feels terribly fresh or original, but it is a really solid setup. The setting is cool. The idea of this small college that is essentially shut down over the holiday while everybody goes home to visit their families is a nice setup. I like this idea of this really large space, this college campus that is virtually empty and deserted, being the setup for this movie. I like that a lot. Now, does it strain credulity a little bit? A little bit. The idea that there's like 3 staff members on hand and only 1 student stayed behind on campus at the dorms, that doesn't feel tremendously realistic to me. There's a little bit of lip service to explain it, but it really feels a little bit thin. The isolation aspect of this, you kind of just have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. But if you can, it's a cool setting. It's a cool idea to see this woman just kind of have the campus to herself, and then how it become more oppressive and more scary as it goes on. I really like that. I also like that the movie starts out with like an opening murder, or the aftermath of an opening murder, that's shot really, really well and really, really creepy. I'll tip my hat to the director, Oliver Blackburn, who I'm not super familiar with, but he did do the movie Donkey Punch, which we haven't talked about on this channel before, but we might talk about in the future. I don't think we've talked about it. But that's the only thing I'm familiar with of his. But The opening scene, really, really coolly shot. I liked what they did. So the setup, I was very in on it. I liked the idea of, thrill killers who kind of hunt at random. I mean, this is basically, not the newest of concepts. This is basically the premise of Halloween, and then it's many, many imitators. Somebody who just selects victims at random, but it doesn't get old. The movie has aspects of The Strangers, another movie I really, really like. These people that zero in on somebody and then terrorize them, scaring the hell out of them, and then ultimately trying to kill them. It's a formula. It's not really original, but it works for me. I'm into that kind of thing. So this movie is something that's kind of in my wheelhouse. It's again not fresh, but it's not something that I have a problem with. It's not something that I'm bored by. I'm definitely into it. But hold that thought for a second. One thing I want to talk about that's really important is the acting. In particular, Haley Bennett, who I'm not super familiar with. I know she's done some work, but she's kind of an unknown to me, but she is fantastic here. She's really, really great as your lead girl, as your victim, if you will, as the final girl. The one who's in this deserted, university or college, and she is very likable, very believable, and just she has a quality about her that you sympathize with and gravitate towards that it's a little hard to quantify, but it's definitely there on screen and is very, very effective. And it's super important because without her anchoring this movie, the movie would fall apart. It really, really would. So I'm going to tip my hat to Haley because she did a great job of keeping me engaged with this movie. Whereas otherwise, I might have slipped out of it because it's got some other issues that we're going to get into. I'll also give a nod to Ashley Greene playing against type as the villain, the main villain here. Ashley Greene, probably mostly famous for Twilight, but it's done a lot of other work too, and very, very pretty and a good actor. And she's really going against type here, playing Sinister, and does a really believable, good job of it. With the hoodie and the piercings and the kind of pale face and dried out lips and everything like that. Really, really effective. I really liked her in this movie. There's also a couple other names in here. Lucas Till, who was in X-Men, amongst other things. James Ransom, who's probably best known for Sinister. But they don't get much of anything to do, honestly. And that is a flaw of the movie, is that the ancillary characters that are set up here are mostly just fodder, kind of like a slasher movie, which this is kind of a slasher movie, but they don't do much with them. They're not very interesting characters. Even though they've got a little bit of talent there, they're not really given anything to do. So that's a little bit of a waste of your resources, to be honest with you. And then the other killers, because it's a group of killers, they're not super intimidating to me. I really liked Ashley Greene, but the other killers kind of come off a little silly to me. They're not super threatening. You got the guy who's like whistling, Jesus loves you and stuff. It's definitely trying very hard to be creepy, but it's not doing the greatest of jobs of actually accomplishing that. And this is probably my biggest shaky aspect of the movie. The biggest problem I have with it is this cult aspect of it. They set it up fairly early what this cult is about and how they got looking for Christies to kill. And Christy's supposed to mean like follower of Christ. And it feels really clunky. It feels very contrived and frankly just kind of silly. If they had focused a little more on making the Christie moniker being more like how we use the word Karen now or something like that, maybe that would have worked a little bit better. But this idea of this online dark web cult who goes out to seek killing Christies to make this kind of statement against God just felt really contrived, really clunky, and a little lazy. They tell you this right up front too, and that's maybe a big flaw with the movie. Maybe it would have been better to not explain the motivations of the killers. I think that would have been a lot more creepy, a lot more sinister. Like if they keep calling this girl Christy, that's not her name, by the way, and you don't know why, I think that goes a lot farther in terms of making it feel creepy. Like, is it a mistaken identity? Why do they keep calling her this? It would have had a little bit more of that stranger's vibe to it, where you don't understand why these people are being targeted. Like that would have made it feel a little bit more sinister to me. And I noted that it's my biggest problem, but it's a really big problem with the movie. In fact, it almost lost me right out the gate. Like the whole explanation of the cult comes up pretty early in the movie, and I was just like, oh, this is kind of lame. But then Haley Bennett kind of brought me back in because she's very likable in the movie. So that was a challenge for me. But then, it's got this kind of cat and mouse aspect, which again does feel a little bit like The Strangers, the way they're kind of scaring her and terrorizing her. But it also does, I see the P2 connection, the similarity there. It really does have this feel of P2, like where you kind of can't escape the space you're trapped in. and you know, you're kind of locked in with these people that want to hurt you. So I see that similarity. It makes a lot of sense why Spencer identified this as a kind of a P2 similarity. It definitely does make that sense. And I love P2. I think it's great. This movie doesn't have that same tension for me. And I think it is because of the shaky cult aspect of it. It doesn't really land for me, but there's enough going on that I'm not hating the movie or anything like that. Like I said, it's still in my wheelhouse. It's still got a lot that you know appeals to me. I'm a kind of an easy sell for these kind of movies. So it's not really something that's a problem in terms of like the whole plot being terrible, but it did remind me that there are better movies that do this that I could be watching. I could be watching P2. I could be watching The Strangers, you know? So that is, you know, an issue with the movie. It's something that makes it a challenge to get behind. You know, so how badly did this affect my experience? Well, that's kind of the question, right? Like, if we're trying to figure out if this is syllabus worthy, we kind of have to address how much did this cult clunkiness affect me? Well, why don't we just dig into that question right now? So let's go ahead and just get into it. Is this movie syllabus worthy? Nah, nah, man. It's a fine movie. I had you know no problems with it. It's a perfectly fine way to spend your 90 minutes if you like these slasher type movies, these stalker type movies. It's really more of a stalker than a slasher. And what's the distinction? Well, I'll talk about that in a future video. But it's a perfectly fine movie. I did not have a bad time with it. I didn't get bored with it exactly, but it didn't really also make a really strong impression on me. Like I said, there are other movies that do the same thing but better. I would rather see P2. I would rather see The Strangers. I'd rather see Halloween for the millionth time. There are a lot of other movies that do this in a more compelling, more original, or more fresh, or more visually dynamic way. This movie is kind of hitting the beats and it doesn't have a lot of real surprises in it. The dog dies. I'm going to just spoil that for you. So that was a little bit of a surprise, which was kind of a bummer, and I didn't love that. But other than that, the movie doesn't really offer a tremendous amount of surprises. The ending is pretty good. I will say this. I liked the final ending, the final resolution of things, and how something that was set up early in the movie did wind up paying off that I did not think would wind up paying off. So that was pretty cool. Credit where it's due. But it doesn't really leave a lasting, you know, impression on me. It doesn't really hit me in a way that's going to stick with me too much. Like I saw this movie a couple days ago, and I'm already forgetting parts of it, which is not great. The fact that it premiered on Lifetime is a bit surprising to me because on the one hand, I would say I'm shocked that a movie like this was on Lifetime because it feels very much more like a horror movie and less like some of the stuff I would see on Lifetime about, you know, women whose husbands want to kill them or whatever. This movie felt a little bit more straight horror, and I'm kind of impressed. I'm kind of impressed if Lifetime was making a movie like this because it's actually pretty darn good for a Lifetime movie. On the flip side, it may be a little bit why they kind of pulled their punches a little bit. This movie could have been a little bit more gory, a little bit more shocking. It's got a little bit of gore into it stuff, but this movie could have gone a little bit more hard, and I think I would have liked it more if it did. If it had a little bit more shocking violence, if it had a little bit more scares or rough edges or stakes, I think I would have dug into it more. And the other problem, of course, I had with it, I think I've kind of already alluded to this, is that you had this really great setup, this opening intro that was really cool, and then the cult kind of made it trite real fast. This cult was just kind of silly and not very scary, and the killers looked like kind of like Purge ripoffs, and it just didn't really scare me or really engage me that much, but Haley Bennett kept me going. Like I said, a lesser actor in that role probably would have lost me earlier in the movie. I just would have been like, nah, I'm not into this at all. But Haley Bennett was good enough that I was like, okay, I'm still engaged, even though these killers, aside from Ashley Green, who was good, uh, they just weren't very threatening. I feel like this movie had a chance to be more. Like I said, it's a rote thriller that you've seen before, but it had enough quality in it, enough, especially with the actors, that you could have done something a little bit more impressive. And this is where maybe Lifetime being the makers probably hurts it a little bit in terms of budget and in terms of what they couldn't or wouldn't show. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. But again, it's not a bad time. I'm not disappointed that I saw it, but I couldn't, in good conscience, recommend it strongly to anybody. And I definitely wouldn't bump anything off the syllabus for it. It just wouldn't make that cut at all. Like I said, it's a perfectly fine way to spend the time if you like these kind of movies. You're not going to be mad at it, but again, I don't think it'll stick with you very long. And so, yeah, it's perfectly fine, but it's not syllabus worthy. So those are my thoughts on Kristy. And I don't think this movie is super well known or super popular. So I don't know if there's many of you that have seen it before. I know Spencer has, of course. So by all means, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think of this movie. Am I missing something about it? Am I being a little bit too hard on it? Am I a little too nitpicky about the fact that some of these things, strength credulity, like cell phones not being able to work and the power going out and the short staff at the college? Am I being too nitpicky about it? Because I feel like my nitpicks are because I wasn't too enthralled with it. So let me know if you think it deserves more love than I'm giving it. Also, let me know if you think it deserves less love than I'm giving it, because I'd like to hear that perspective as well. But let's talk about it in the comments below. And for now, let's talk about Horror Trivia Pursuit as I try to get my glasses on without stabbing myself in the eye. As for those of you that don't know, I'm going to read a Horror Trivia Pursuit card. It's become a tradition here on the channel, and I'm going to try to answer it here live on camera. Let's go ahead and go with the psychological category on the card, because Kristy has a good psychological aspect to it, so that seems like an appropriate place to go. And the question is this: what is the name of the villainous character Kathy Bates portrays in 1990's Misery? Okay, this is a fairly easy question for me to answer. I know this movie pretty well. And I also just recently watched somebody do a reaction video on it. So it's very fresh in my mind. It was like 2 weeks ago. So I actually know this character's name pretty well. And I know it, despite the fact that, for those of you who are longtime viewers of the channel, no, I usually suck at names. I usually suck at names of characters. I'm good at names of actors, but names of characters I'm usually really bad at. But in this case, I know this one, and I just got my memory refreshed recently on it. So this one is going to land for me pretty well. So I know this one. I am 99.9% sure that I have this answer correctly. I'm going to prattle a little bit on this about this because I want to give you guys a chance to think, but not too long, because I kind of either know or you don't, but I suppose you can make a guess. But this movie is fantastic. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. One of the best Stephen King adaptations you'll ever see. Rob Reiner, who is a wonderfully versatile director, and of course Kathy Bates, who won an Academy Award for this performance. And if you've never seen her Academy Award speech, it's definitely worth looking up. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. And she is amazing in this movie. And James Caan, of course, playing the protagonist in that movie. It's a wonderful movie, a great thriller. Like I said, one of the best Stephen King movies. And her performance is so unhinged. It's so great. And of course, well, I'm getting off track. We've talked about Misery before, so we don't need to get into the details too much. I've given you a little bit of time to think about it. I'm about to make my guess. So wrap up your thoughts right now. Come up with that name right now, because I'm about to answer my answer. My guess, of course, is Annie Wilkes. Annie Wilkes is the name of the obsessed fan that Kathy Bates plays in Misery. I'm super certain of it, but let's double check with the card. Annie Wilkes. Annie Wilkes. It's right there. Yeah, like that one was like a right down the middle pitch for me. Like I knew that one coming in so easily, because I just watched somebody on YouTube do a reaction video to it. It's a pretty good reaction video, by the way. That movie lands to this day. It's aged remarkably well. So if you haven't seen Misery, definitely check it out. Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes is fantastic. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. Again, if you haven't seen Kristy or you watch it, let me know what you think of it. If you have seen Kristy, let me know what you think of it. Let's talk in the comments about it. But that's my thoughts on it. And next week we'll be talking about something else that's probably a little bit different. But until then, class dismissed.